What's going on, nation? I'm your host, Kenneth Tiberius Clark, and you guys are listening to another fun episode of the Sportsclusive Podcast. That being said, topic for today, the NFL is still learning how to truly evaluate quarterbacks. I know it sounds absurd, right? Because they've been doing it for years, and we keep getting the next blue chip quarterback prospect coming in the draft. But this is a topic that's been near and dear to my heart for some time now. I've discussed it many times over in the past. But yeah, I feel like this is something that the NFL has struggled with. I think that they continue to go with the popular, big name guys that go to big universities. I think evaluators getting what I call shiny toy syndrome. They want the guys that have that they just got big arms and they can run a 4.40. Right. So I think they get caught up in that process. But we'll kind of take a quick dive in to some of my findings over the past few years of failures from the evaluation process. Obviously, before we jump into that, we have to look at the evaluation process as a whole. What are some of the things that scouts look at? Right. So I was able to narrow it down to about 4 or 5 different things. I mashed up some because I don't want to go crazy long. First would be size and arm strength / arm talent. Size. Obviously, most teams want a quarterback with decent size. I want to say 6'2" at a minimum. Ideally, they want guys that are 6'4", 6'5", John Elway, Justin Herbert, right? But I think 6'2" is the minimum. But obviously, we have our outliers with our Drew Brees, our Russell Wilsons, our Kyler Murrays, right? We get some shorter guys, our Doug Flutys. We get our shorter guys that come in the league and are able to find some success. But ideally, teams want a quarterback that is 6'2" and up. Arm strength. How far can they push it down the field? How strong is their arm, or how powerful is their arm that they can fit the ball in certain windows, right? The more powerful and explosive your arm is, you can get the ball in different windows that other quarterbacks can't. So arm strength matters. Arm talent. All right. When we look at arm talent, we want to look at quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, a Matthew Stafford, quarterbacks that can literally make throws that other quarterbacks can't. They can move and bend and twist and, I'm trying to figure out the exact word. They can do different things that other quarterbacks cannot, right? I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm over here straddling, looking for the right, correct word to use. But they can make throws that other quarterbacks simply cannot because they're able to put the balls in different type of places, right? All based on their arm talent, curve their arm, all kind of crazy stuff. So then we look at football IQ. Football IQ is very simple. Can you read defenses? Can you call your own protections? Can you call your own audibles? Do you have play recognition? Can you decipher coverages that are in front of you? Can you remember certain things that teams have done against you in the past? Can you watch tape? Can you break down tape and understand how to truly study a defense? Those are the things that teams look for in their quarterback prospects in the evaluation process. Can they do any of those things? Football IQ. 3, leadership. I think leadership is possibly the most important of all of these, right? Because even if your quarterback isn't supremely talented, I'll talk about it a little bit. We get a lot of quarterbacks that are immensely talented that don't have leadership, and we get guys that aren't really talented and they have great leadership capabilities, i.e. a Taylor Heineke or a Nick Foles, right? So leadership is important, especially at the quarterback position. Even if the guy isn't a phenom or he doesn't have these just great athletic physical traits, they have to be a leader of men. Even if it's not vocally, they have to be a leader by example, right? So leadership is important. 4 is pocket presence. Do they have a feel of what's going on around them? Do they have what I like to call spatial awareness, right? When that pocket's collapsing and they got to step up or they got to take a step back, they got to move to their right or their left. They have to avoid the rush. Can they do those type of things? Right. That also ties into like situational awareness and pressure points. Can they make those throws or take the sacks? Sometimes you're not going to be able to make it, though. Sometimes you got to be smart and just take the sack or get the ball out, throw the ball away, get it on the sideline or throw it in the back of the end zone. What does your situational awareness look like? Right. That also ties in a little bit to football IQ. But pocket presence is very important for a young quarterback because the NFL is just a completely different beast. You're playing against 300-pound athletic guys that you've never played against ever. That's something to look for. Pocket presence is very, very important for a young quarterback. These are some of the things that they look at. And to tell you the truth, we'll find quarterbacks that hit 2 of the wickets, maybe sometimes 3. It's extremely difficult to find a quarterback that hits or fills all buckets, all 4 buckets. That's tough, right? I wanted to look into 2 drafts to kind of give people an idea of how difficult it is to kind of pinpoint quarterbacks. And this would be considered a quarterback heavy draft because these are essentially just the first 2 rounds, within the first 50 picks. So I looked at the 2018 draft and the 2011 draft. The 2011 draft, obviously Cam Newton went number 1 overall. He had that stud year at Auburn, won a national championship, won a Heisman. Once again, comes to the NFL, goes number 1 overall. But then after him, within the top 15 picks, you had 3 other quarterbacks go. You had Blaine Gabbert from Mizzou. He got drafted by Jacksonville. You had Jake Locker from Washington. He got drafted by Tennessee. And you had Christian Ponder from Florida State, and he got drafted by Minnesota. Keep a long story short, none of them panned out. Blaine Gabbert is a career backup. I want to say he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now. Jake Locker is out of the league. Christian Ponder wasn't in the league for very long. And to be honest, I think that he was probably one of the bigger overdrafted cases in a while. I think that they couldn't find anybody that they really were in love with, or Minnesota maybe felt like they wasn't going to get a Cam Newton, or at the time Blaine Gabbert was a hot name, so maybe they kind of overdrafted Christian Ponder. So kind of unfortunate for him because he kind of got put in a spot that he probably shouldn't have. I think he was more of a second round guy, but Christian Ponder no longer in the league. Then you look in the second round, they had Colin Kaepernick and Andy Dalton. Colin Kaepernick, we know he had his time with the 49ers, led them to a Super Bowl, been to 1 or 2 different NFC championships, and had a stretch where he really was playing good. Never made a Pro Bowl, but he had a time where he was playing pretty solid ball. But ultimately, outside of the social, obviously the stance he was making for social injustice, his play did start to suffer even before that. The read option was, I'll talk about this in a little bit. The read option I felt like was a big fad, and quarterbacks that their bread and butter was the read option. Once that died out, once defensive coordinators figured it out, if those guys weren't able to make the transition and adjust and become better passers, then they were going to die out. And I think Colin Kaepernick was kind of a result of that. Once again, he's not in the league anymore. Andy Dalton was obviously the next quarterback taken in the second round in that draft. He actually was able to carve out a pretty solid, respectable career in Cincinnati. Once again, didn't blow the socks off, or he wasn't a first team All Pro guy. He made a few Pro Bowls, very solid, very consistent, formed a really good tandem with AJ Green, and I think he really helped Cincinnati bridge the gap between Carson Palmer and now they have Joe Burrow. For the longest, after Carson Palmer retired, because, he wanted to leave Cincinnati and, ownership, that front office didn't let him leave, so he retired. They weren't able to find another quarterback to kind of fill that, to take up that mantle. So Andy Dalton was really able to hold down the fort for about 5 or 6 years. Now he's been bouncing around as a backup, but right now he's currently starting for the New Orleans Saints. All right, they're not very good, but at least he's starting. So Andy Dalton, I would say, in the grand scheme of things, has had a respectable career. He wasn't a failure. Cam Newton, as great as he is, he had some highs, won an MVP, made it to a Super Bowl, lost that Super Bowl, made a few Pro Bowls, but he's actually out of the league himself now. So that just gives you an idea of that quarterback draft class. Everybody was so caught up on what these guys were from a physical standpoint. Cam Newton, supreme athlete. Blaine Gabbert was supposed to be this big arm guy. Jake Locker was a physical guy, kind of similar in the mode of a Tim Tebow. I don't know what the hell Christian Ponder was. I'll be honest. I'm not even going to flex with y'all. I don't know what Christian Ponder was for people to look at his game and say, oh, this guy's, a top 15 pick. At least Colin Kaepernick was a phenomenal athlete coming out of Nevada, and Andy Dalton was a winner and a very poised leader coming out of TCU. So that's the 2011 draft class. Big time failure for the most part. Andy Dalton is a last man standing as a starter. And he was, if I'm not mistaken, I think the last of those quarterbacks drafted. I could be wrong, but I'll double check. Then we got the 2018 draft class. This one was pretty interesting. Baker Mayfield at number 1 overall. Sam Darnold. You had Josh Rosen. right? Josh Rosen, the blue collar, kid that came from privilege and money, played at UCLA, had a pretty solid career there, gets drafted to Arizona, one and done. Kyler Murray comes, right? Then you had Josh Allen, who is the funny part is in that draft, Josh Allen was kind of the guy that had put probably some of the worst tape up. Played at Wyoming. His last year at Wyoming was very subpar, and Buffalo drafted him just off of talent. And I will say this, thank God they had a plan for him. They had Brian Daboll in the building, and they were able to develop him and build him brick by brick, step by step, year by year. They kept adding weapons, and now he's a top 2, top 3 quarterback in the National Football League. Yeah, that's Josh Allen. And then you have Lamar Jackson, who was the 32nd overall pick in that draft. He was the last pick of the first round and the last quarterback taken in the first round. So, but he's managed to at least be knocking on the door of superstar status. And we know what he's done as a runner, but he's made strides as a passer as well. A lot of people were down on him. They said, you switched to running back or wide receiver. But he's managed to quell all that and to become a pretty solid, pretty damn good quarterback. And at times he looks MVP level. So, yeah, I mean, that's the 2018-2011 draft class. These guys, at the time, we're looking at this like, man, this is going to be all these guys going in the first round, top 15, right? And only, I think we can look at it, 2018, so far, only Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson have established themselves as proven starters in this league. 2011, Andy Dalton's the last guy standing. And I think when you look at that, I think it's because you look at what do these guys have in common. All of them have had to battle through some iota of adversity. All of them are very fierce competitors, strong intangibles, leaders by nature. It's not because they're the most physically talented. I think if Josh Allen, he's talented, but I think Josh Allen could have very easily been a bust. But he went to the right environment, and they were able to develop and kind of hone in on the intangibles that he did have. He's a fierce competitor, and he'll do anything to win. That guy just wants to win. And I think that's why you're seeing him be successful at this trajectory of his career, because he's put in the work, right? You could tell outside of his talent, he's genuinely put in the work to become great. Obviously, when looking at these two draft classes, it's crazy because I think people kind of set the bar a little bit too high for these young quarterbacks. They expect them to come in and just blow the socks off the thing, just blow the doors off and just be first team all pros year one and make off platform throws and do all this crazy stuff, right? And lead a franchise. The truth is I can say this, I'm born in 92. Maybe you can say I'm young and maybe you can name me somebody else. The only quarterback I've seen come in year one to a bad team and win is Andrew Luck. He's the only quarterback that was as advertised. Everybody else has been, this guy's going to be game changer. He's going to be an all pro, and they're out of the league 2 years later. Andrew Luck's literally the only guy. And that's because he's one of the few people that filled all of those buckets. He had the size and arm strength. He can make all the necessary throws. He had a high football IQ. He was a fierce leader. He'll put his body on the line. He had great pocket presence and situational awareness. He's the only young quarterback I've personally seen that has filled all of those buckets. So that's how rare it is to really find just this elite or really good quarterback out the gate, because these young guys need to develop. To give you another example of how skewed the draft or the evaluation process of young quarterbacks can be. Since we're talking about Andrew Luck, the 2012 draft, you had RG3 and Kirk Cousins. RG3 won the Heisman at Baylor. I mean, he was everything. And he went number 2 overall to now they're the Washington Commanders, but he went number 2 overall, and in the same draft in the third round, they take Kirk Cousins out of Michigan State. And I remember when that happened, I was like, damn, I feel bad for Kirk Cousins, because I really liked his tape at Michigan State. I'm like, this is a good quarterback. He could be a starter in this league. But obviously they get into that organization, and RG3 has success early on. He wins Rookie of the Year, makes a Pro Bowl as a rookie. Does a really good job. Kyle Shanahan, who's now the coach of the 49ers, was their offensive coordinator at the time. He gets hurt in that Seattle game in the playoffs, and he's never the same. Now, some people would attribute it to that, which if you did, I'm not going to fight you too much on it. But what I will do is I will push back And I'll say that because he got hurt in the way that he did, anyone that watched it, he hurt his knee in that playoff game against Seattle. He was a guy that I think was talented, but he was so dependent on his athleticism that he hadn't taken the time to really develop the necessary skills to become a really solid passing quarterback. And I think once that was robbed of him, or once it was, you're able to negate some of the things that he could do from an athletic standpoint, I think that's where his stock and his value started to plummet and his play really dropped. And as it happened, I know people were talking about, he kind of wasn't a great leader, a little bit selfish, a little bit childish, immature. And those were the whispers. And then eventually, within the next 3 to 4 years, he wasn't in Washington anymore. And now I think I can be critical, and I can say this because of where he is now. He's actually risen to become a very accomplished broadcaster in the sports media world. He just, that was his chance, his opportunity. And I think that unfortunately he wasn't able to take advantage, and he kind of flamed out. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins, who wasn't as heralded, after a while, people start to realize, like, man, this kid can really play. Not only can he play, he's a great leader and a great locker room guy. Those guys love him. And Kirk isn't perfect, right? Kirk isn't like a generational talent at quarterback. He definitely has his warts. He has his flaws. But guys genuinely love him in that locker room. But to give you a quick idea of just what people thought about the two, right? This should kind of tie it up and make it make sense. So this is what they say about RG3. This is how they still kind of evaluate quarterbacks, but this is what they said about RG3. I don't hear nothing about intangible. Although he's slightly undersized, his athletic ability lends well to him being able to be an NFL type quarterback who can make plays with his feet. He has some of the same natural talents that Cam Newton had. Remember, this is the 2012 draft. This is a year after Cam Newton is drafted. So they're going goo gaga. They just want an athletic quarterback. Then you have this one. He overcomes a slight size deficiency by simply being so athletic that defenders rarely get a shot on him. So once again, goo gaga over the athleticism. At this point, here's another one. At this point, unlike Andrew Luck, he can also move the ball downfield with his feet. I hate to curse and I hate to be vulgar. What the hell does that have to do with playing the quarterback position? And he went number 2 overall. And there were some people that were questioning that he was possibly even better than Andrew Luck. Oh, watch this. Russell Wilson got taken in that draft too. So that should factor. These are how teams look at quarterbacks. They're all about once again, the shiny toy syndrome. Meanwhile, we look at a Kirk Cousins, and they're very critical of him. They question his decision-making, which you can still. Sometimes he makes his mistakes, even in the league, having been in the league for a while. He's starting for Minnesota right now, having a hell of a season. But he has times where he'll make throws, and you're like, come on, Kirk, what you doing? Coming out of college, I don't know why people looked at Kirk Cousins and said he couldn't be the starter. He had the arm. He could make all the throws. He came out of a pro-style offense. So he's under center. He's taking these 3 to 5 step drops. Like he's doing that as a young quarterback coming out of Michigan State, right? But people question his decision making. He's had consistency issues, and even in one thing we're seeing right now in the league, and I love him to death, but he does struggle in prime time. But he's carved out a pretty long, successful career for himself, and he got franchise tagged a few times over there in Washington. But if I'm not mistaken, he was the first NFL player to get a fully guaranteed contract. Fully guaranteed. After that, he said, I'm not taking no more. You're not franchise tagging me anymore. And he became, he got a fully guaranteed contract over there with Minnesota. And he's been their starter for about 3 to 4 years. So I say all that to say is that sometimes, too often, and people are just so in awe about the athletic traits, and they don't understand that there's, when it comes to quarterback, to me, it's more about intangibles and IQ and what you can do from a mental standpoint. Quarterback's the most cerebral, difficult position in sports. And we're saying because a guy has a big arm, he's going to be successful at it. I give you the best example. In 1998, you had a young quarterback coming in who everybody was big on out of Tennessee. Peyton Manning, been a man since he was in high school. Cerebral, smart, great mechanics, everything. And they said a young kid named Ryan Leaf from Washington State was better than him. And I'll read off a few reasons why they thought that. Ryan Leaf appears to be the hot QB in this draft. He can stand in and take the big hits. He's a very naturally gifted player. but could improve his throwing mechanics. Watch this. Although it's not a major problem. He has throwing mechanic issues, but it's not a major problem because he's physically talented. There are no physical or athletic limitations to hold Leaf back from becoming a great QB. His ability to play as physical as he does and take the hits that will obviously come when playing for a team that obviously doesn't have a very good O-line, that will help him get over the tough times as a team builds around. So they were going crazy over his size, over his athletic ability, and they were dismissing his lack of mechanics, his lack of football IQ. Once again, he's a big physical presence, so that's supposed to overcome everything. So then we look at Peyton Manning's draft report, his scouting report, and some of the things that guys said about him. They said he's probably the most prepared quarterback to enter the draft in several years. He has maturity and great intangibles to go along with his natural skills. He has great overall field vision. He's a fierce competitor, and all of his mechanics are very solid. He has good arm strength, but not a gun, right? Not a gun that you might expect from a QB at the top of the draft. He's not quite as natural of a player as Ryan Leaf is. One question that some NFL scouts have is, will he get any better? This is crazy. He may be a solid and productive NFL quarterback, but he may not have Hall of Fame type skills. But it certainly won't be for lack of effort. They said that about Peyton Dan Manning, who's a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the most cerebral, intelligent quarterbacks to ever grace this game. This is what they said about him coming out of the draft. Mind you, Ryan Leaf, and once again, I have nothing but respect for Ryan Leaf because he's turned his life around and he's actually become a pretty well-spoken, well-respected guy in sports media as well. He was out of the league and not even that long. I think he was out of the league within 3 years. He struggled with the lifestyle, partying, drugs. It's a well-known fact that he had a chance to actually be drafted by Indianapolis, but he missed the meeting. He missed that pre-draft meeting. He showed up to the combine out of shape, partying and, kind of going on his little, I forgot what he called it, but going on his little tour where, he visited. He was kind of, he was on his little award tour where he was showing face and kissing babies and doing all that. Like, he thought that he was just finna ride off into the sunset and become a Hall of Fame quarterback, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. But just the crazy part is just seeing how Peyton Manning, as great as he was coming out of Tennessee, for them to put Ryan Leaf out of Washington State over him just because Ryan Leaf had more exciting physical traits. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And looking at that example, I think is why we continue to fall into the hole that we fall into with these young quarterbacks. We look at the next young stud. We say, oh, he can throw a ball pretty far. He can run a 4.40. He's going to be a stud in the National Football League. What we do is we draft these quarterbacks. There's no foundation. We don't know their intangibles. Some of these guys have never been through a lick of adversity in their damn lives. And we draft them and we say, you're going to lead an NFL franchise, grown men, and you're going to play in the toughest football league there is to play in. And we expect them to be successful. Oh, and my bad. You got to be a Pro Bowler or you got to be a good player within 2 years. I want people to factor this in. Trevor Lawrence, who is probably the second most highly touted quarterback in the past 25, 50 years behind Andrew Luck. He looks average right now. He's playing for Jacksonville, and there are days where I'm looking at him like, Jesus Christ, who the hell was that at Clemson? And if I'm not mistaken, coming to the league, and Trevor Lawrence had only lost 3 games. The second most highly touted quarterback in the past 25 to 50 years. And he comes to the league and he looks average. And people were saying he was going to be a stud day one. He can carry your team. He can do more with less. And he hasn't been that. So that should show you, that should be proof enough for you guys. If it could happen to Trevor Lawrence, it could happen to anybody. Because the kid has talent, but he said something key. The NFL is the first time that my confidence has been tested. And I thought that was very telling. And it's not because I think Trevor Lawrence is mentally weak. Once again, I'm not selling on Trevor Lawrence. I still think Trevor Lawrence can be goddamn good. But my thing is, and what I want to preach to people is, we're still not realizing that Andrew Luck and what he did is rare. So we're expecting young quarterbacks to come in and do what he did. It's unrealistic thinking. And not only are we putting too high expectations on these kids, we're evaluating them just based off of their physical traits. Quarterback? And here's the funny part. The league has continued to show us that guys with less attractive physical traits and more attractive intangible traits are more successful. I mean, is anybody going to look me in the face and tell me that Joe Montana is the standard for athleticism in the National Football League? Before Tom Brady, Joe Montana was being talked about as the GOAT. Tom Brady is not a physically imposing player. He's a student of the game and a fierce competitor. Peyton Manning, I just talked about him. Cerebral, can make all the throws, a mechanic. He can do everything. But people question his arm strength and his athleticism, rightfully so. He's slow as molasses, but his arm strength is adequate enough, but it's just not great. Drew Brees, 6 foot, even. Met him in person. Not a big guy. Didn't have a big arm. Noodle arm for the most part, but thrived on anticipatory throws and accuracy. That's what his game was. First ballot Hall of Famer. We got to keep going with this. Are we going to keep banging our heads up against the wall and saying because this kid's 6'5" and he looks like a Greek god and he has a cannon for an arm that he's going to be the next greatest quarterback in the National Football League? Look at Jamarcus Russell. And this is not and once again, Jamarcus Russell has grown, I think, into a very mature individual. And I'm sure he had a lot of things that helped, that kind of added to him getting to where he got and not being a successful quarterback in the league. But he had it all. The NFL at the quarterback position is not about talent. If it was, then Aaron Rodgers would have 5 championships. He has 1. And outside of that, has sucked in the playoffs. Dan Marino has no championships. Grit, intangibles, character, and leadership is what wins at the quarterback position. And until somebody can come in here and prove me wrong. I'm going to continue to stand on this point. NFL teams, however you going through your evaluation process, man, tighten up. Stop falling for the shiny toy syndrome. It doesn't work. It's a rinse and repeat type of process. A lot of these guys just don't work out. The NFL draft is already difficult enough. Only a certain amount of players make it to the league. Quarterback is even harder. I want to say it's about anywhere between a 40 to 60% success rate. Very, very difficult position. If I were you, I'd get somebody that had been in some kind of adversity, somebody that's a leader, somebody that you can depend on, somebody that your locker room gravitates around. Look at Washington right now with Taylor Heineke. Carson Wentz is head and shoulders better than Taylor Heineke. But it's something about Taylor Heineke that team will run through they'll run through a brick wall for him. And he is not more talented than Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz, Kyler Murray, immense talent, questionable intangibles. Can't win a playoff game. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. That's my case evaluating quarterbacks. Once again, I'll die on this hill and I'll fight this until the day that I die. But yeah, like I said, you guys make sure, especially when we go into this next pre-draft process, start looking at some of these guys' personal stories, what they went through, who they are as people, and then you'll get a better idea of what guys you think can come into the league and lead an NFL franchise. Honestly, I miss the Gruden grinder. Hopefully he brings it back. I think the Gruden grinder was so fun because you really got to feel for some of these quarterbacks before they entered the draft. That's where for the first time I figure I'm like, damn, this is who this kid Dak Prescott is? Because I thought he was just, some average quarterback from Mississippi State, but he's a high character guy. He's a high IQ guy and he's a leader, right? And that's why he's a starter making $40+ million per year, right? Kirk Cousins as well, right? Derek Carr as well. Yeah, I can go on a tangent all day. But thanks, guys, for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.